y'all, welcome to the Big Bear Homestead. Today we're going to do something a little bit different on Kitchen Time. Today we're actually going to tackle a new recipe, and I'm going to show you how I approach trying something different. So today we're making homemade Samoa bars. Okay guys, so this time of year, after Christmas and Thanksgiving's all done, the next thing that comes right before Valentine's Day is Girl Scout season. Cookies come, you go everywhere you go, they're sitting out in front of the grocery stores trying to sell those cookies. Well, I'm one of those people, I like to make stuff myself. And every year I say, I'm gonna make Thin Mints, I'm gonna make Samoas, and I just never get around to it. So this year, I'm going to make Thin Mints and Samoas. Well, we'll try the Samoas first, see how it goes, and then the Thin Mints I think are going to be a lot easier. So what I'm going to do with you today is we're actually going to go through the recipe, and I'm going to tell you some things that I saw with it that we need to do a little bit differently, and then we'll put it all together and taste it and see how it turns out. Okay, so as we do with every time before we get to cooking, there's a couple housekeeping things you want to do. One, this recipe calls for the oven to be at 2 separate temperatures, and I'm going to go into that a little bit more in detail in just a second. So we're not really going to worry too much about the oven just yet. We'll cover that in the next, as soon as we get through all the other stuff. But one thing you do want to do is make sure you have 2 separate baking pans. One needs to be a 9-inch by 13-inch. The other one, it doesn't really matter what size, just has to be big enough for the coconut. You're definitely going to want some parchment paper, and if you don't have a double boiler, which is the pan, and then there's a pot that sits, or a pot, and then a pot that sits inside the pot to be able to melt chocolate. If you don't have that, you just need a simple pot and then a metal bowl to put over top of it. So make sure you have all of those things, and we'll get started in just a second. Okay, first things first, oven goes on 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Then let's talk ingredients. So the very first thing that you'll need is the stuff that you're going to use to make your crust. So instead of like the little cookies, we're actually going to do bars, because with the cookies you have to cut out the little fancy circles, and that's just too much of a headache. As long as it tastes the same, I'm not really worried about the presentation. So the very first thing, as far as what you need, you're going to need 1 large egg. This isn't really large, but we'll make it work. You'll need a stick and a half of butter. And you need that to be at room temperature. So go ahead and pull that out, let it sit when you get ready to make this. You need a half a teaspoon of vanilla extract. You'll need a 1/4 of a teaspoon of kosher salt. You're going to need a half a cup of sugar, granulated sugar. And then you'll need 2 cups of flour. Now that's everything for the crust. Okay, so now for the filling or the topping. The first thing you're going to need is 3 tablespoons of milk. You'll need another 1/4 teaspoon of kosher salt. You'll need 3 cups of coconut flakes or shredded coconut. Then you'll need, and this is where it gets a little tricky, I had to actually pull out my scale because a lot of times the caramel and the chocolate, they won't be sold in the exact amounts that you need. So this is by weight. You're going to need 12 ounces of caramel, whether it be like the little bits like this or whether it's the squares, but you need 12 ounces. And then for the chocolate, you need 10 ounces. Now, you can use either milk chocolate or dark chocolate. We're gonna go ahead and make it with the milk chocolate first, and then we'll try the dark chocolate later down the road. So that's all the ingredients that you need. Let's get ready to put this stuff together. Okay, so let's talk about the recipe a little bit. One thing I like to do, and this is from years of experience, is I read through the entire recipe from the top all the way to the bottom before I start making whatever it is that I'm setting out to make. In this case, I looked at the recipe, all the ingredients made sense, but the order in which you make it didn't make sense. Because the very first step says you need to go ahead and make your crust. And then the second step says go ahead and do your topping. Well, that makes sense in the way that you would put it together, that you would assemble it. However, as far as time goes, it makes more sense to do it this way. So what we're going to do is we're going to prepare the coconut first because it needs to be at a lower temperature in the oven. So it's easier to bring a temperature up to a higher temp than it is to cool a temperature down in an oven. So we'll start at 300 with the coconut, and then we'll take it up to 350 after we pull the coconut out to be able to make the crust. Okay, and the other reason for that too is that in the recipe it calls for the coconut to cool. So while the crust is in the oven cooking, it will have 20 to 25 minutes to cool down. If we had done it the other way, this recipe would take twice as long to do and it would be a little frustrating. So we're going to do it this way. Very first thing you need, go ahead and take your 3 cups of coconut flakes, and you'll already have prepared your pan with some parchment paper. You know, that's my favorite thing now is the parchment paper. So all you're gonna do is just spread this out all over your pan. And you kind of want it to be spread out and not, you know, you don't want it all on top of each other. I'm going to spread it out as best you can so that when you go to brown it, because basically what we're doing is toasting it, you're going to, every about 5 minutes, you're going to stir it around, but the more area space you have for it to spread out, the less you'll have to stir it and flip it. Okay. All right. There's that. And we'll spread it out. It's a nice light layer. And in the recipe, it does recommend that you use a pan that has edges so that the coconut doesn't fall off the sides. And that makes good sense to me. You could use a baking sheet, but I recommend doing a cookie sheet because then that way you don't have a big mess on your hands. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this pan, go ahead and throw it in the oven. Okay, now you can't smell it in here, but it smells fantastic from the coconut toasting. I've already stirred it once, set the timer for 20 minutes, and at about the 15-minute mark, the 10-minute mark, and the 5-minute mark, you want to go ahead and stir that. So we've been doing that while we're setting everything up. The first step with the crust is you're going to take your your sugar and your butter. So your sugar is going to be a 1/2 cup. Go ahead and put that in to your mixing bowl. I'm going to use the KitchenAid to mix this up. Get my spatula, make sure you get all of that sugar. Okay. All right. And then you're going to mix in that 1.5 sticks of butter, which is 3/4 cup. Okay. So let's lift up. Okay. And we'll get the butter. Put that in there. And get that other stick in there. Okay. You want to just get that nice and mixed together. In the directions it says to cream it together. So we're going to get it to where it's nice and mixed. Okay. I imagine this is what they want it to look like, and I'll show you. Okay, so you kind of want it to look like that, where it's kind of mixed together and the sugar is starting to kind of mix into the butter and kind of become one with the butter. Okay? Now, let's do our second step. And we're going to add, and the next step says that at a low speed, you want to beat in the egg and the vanilla extract. So we'll turn that on to a low speed. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and put in the vanilla extract. Now, I imagine it would be okay if you added a little extra vanilla extract if you wanted to in there. It's not going to hurt anything. So if you get a little heavy-handed with that, it's okay. And then you're going to go ahead and put your egg in there. Now, in this kind of a situation, I would go ahead and crack your egg and put it into one of your ramekins or one of your bowls so that you don't get any of the shell in there. You want to make sure that none of the shell gets into that. So we'll look in there, don't see any shell. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and pour that in there. And let it mix in. All right, now it says to go ahead and beat in the flour and the salt until the mixture is crumbly like wet sand. Okay? So we'll go ahead and add our salt. Okay. And now we're going to very gently start to add our flour. And I'll show y'all in just a second what they mean by the sand, for it to look like sand. Now, one thing, I don't know about y'all's KitchenAids, but I definitely need the other paddle bit that has the has like a rubber on the outside of the paddle bit, and that helps to get all of the stuff that gets up against the bowl or at the very bottom of the bowl that doesn't get mixed together, because that's one thing I'm seeing, at least with how I'm doing it right now. It does, some of the bottom is not getting mixed together. So take care of that, get it all mixed up, and then the next step is going to be to put it in your pan. So we'll come back for that in just a second. Okay, so our timer went off. The coconut is done. As you can see, it has toasted and it's nice and brown. Okay, and what you'll do is put that on a wire rack to let it cool. Now, I can kind of cheat because my burners act kind of like a wire rack. So if you don't have a wire rack, but you have the opportunity to use it this way, that way the air can still circulate up underneath the pan. Helps it to cool a little bit more evenly. So we're just gonna let that sit off to the side and cool down. It'll take it about 20 minutes for it to cool down. Now we're going to take our pan. This is a 9 by 13 pan, and I went ahead and lined it with parchment paper. Okay, and then what you're going to do is your mixture, your dough mixture, you're going to go ahead and put it out here onto the pan. Now, remember I said that it's supposed to be kind of like a wet sand mixture, and this is kind of what it's going to look like. It kind of looks like a, not really Play-Doh, but almost like the wet sand when you're building a sandcastle is kind of what it reminds me of. okay? And we'll just plop it all out onto the pan. And then what you're gonna do is press it down into the pan to make that crust. And then we're gonna put it in the oven to bake. And that will bake for about 20 to 25 minutes. Oh, I missed a spot. Can't miss a spot. There we go. Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of press it down, start spreading it on the parchment paper. And it does kind of feel like almost like a sandy Play-Doh, is what it feels like. Because you can still feel the sugar, a little bit of the sugar in there. Now, if you prefer to use a rolling pin, I imagine that would work okay. But you want to push this all out. And I'm imagining it's gonna need to be really thin. So we're just gonna start pushing it out to the edges. And we'll see just how thin this batter actually spreads. Okay, as you can see, that was a little bit of an ordeal. I actually had to pull out my rolling pin because I'm a little bit of a perfectionist and I wanted this to go all the way to the edges. You definitely will have to spread out your dough pretty far to make sure that it goes all the way to the edges, because you don't want any of your bar to not have a crust at the bottom. So I've gone ahead and spreaded this all the way out to the edge. It's pretty even. And now we're going to go ahead and put it into the oven. It's going to be at 350 degrees. So when we got the coconut out, we went ahead and brought the temperature of the oven up to 350. And now we're going to go ahead and put this crust into the oven. Okay, so now it's time to make the topping. Very first thing you'll need to do is go ahead and get your double boiler set up. So you want to have water down in the bottom. Okay, so you'll put some water down in the bottom. And then you'll put your other pan on top. Now, if you don't have a double boiler, you can use a regular pot, put the water in it, bring it to a boil, and then you can use just a simple metal bowl and put it over top of the pan. Just make sure, or the pot, make sure that it doesn't fall down into it, and it would just sit just like that. And what will happen is the heat from the steam, when it starts to boil, will actually heat the bottom of the bowl. So when you're melting something and you don't need direct contact with the bottom of the burner, this is how you'll do it. Now, one thing I'll say about this recipe is it uses a microwave for all of the melting everything. Now, we don't have a microwave. We don't really believe in using a microwave, so we're doing it this way. Again, in the directions, no mention of using your stovetop. This is just the way that we're doing it. So you'll go ahead and make sure that you've got a nice heat coming on the bottom of the pan, which it's pretty nice and warm. So what you'll do is go ahead and put all of your caramel down into the pot. Okay? And then you're also going to add your milk, and your salt. Okay? And we'll wait for that to melt. My spatula was dirty. Didn't clean it. Okay, so start to stir that and let it melt. Now it's going to take it a little while because, again, you're not going in direct contact with the bottom of the pot and being touched by the burner. So this will take a little bit, but pay attention and you'll start to see it turn into a nice little cream. Okay, so now our caramel has melted and it's completely smooth. So let me show you what it looks like. It's just like caramel sauce. Okay, now we still have about 7 or 8 minutes left on our the crust part. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn this off and let it sit for a minute while we're waiting for the crust to finish cooking. Okay, so the oven timer went off. We checked it, pulled it out of the oven, and as you can see, those edges are nice and brown. All right, and I have taken it out of the pan, left it on the parchment paper, and put it on a wire rack so that it can cool, because now it needs to cool for us to be able to put the topping on it. So, what I said earlier before about doing them in the opposite, I misjudged how long it would take for the coconut to cook and cool. So it would make sense to go ahead and make this, but keep in mind you're going to make this and just put it aside, because it needs to be cool in order for you to make your topping and put your topping on it. So what we're going to do is just wait just for a little bit, and then what we're going to do is put the coconut into the caramel, mix it all together, and then we'll place that on top and spread it evenly. Okay, so the cake is completely cooled. Now when I took it out, we kind of put it in the refrigerator to cool it off a little bit. Took it out and I broke it a little bit, but it's okay because, I mean, we're basically going to be putting glue on it anyway, so I'm not really worried about it. Now we're going to take the coconut and put it into the caramel. One thing I did notice with adding the milk and the salt, it keeps it from hardening. So this is a step that you can kind of do a little bit early and not worry about it turning back into something hard. See, it's still fairly warm and it's still pretty smooth in the consistency. So we're just gonna go ahead and add the coconut in there and just kind of fold it in a little bit at a time until you get it all in there. There's still plenty of caramel, but it's definitely thickening up to where the coconut is taking up a good portion of the liquid of the caramel. I may leave some of this out. We'll see. I'm gonna stir it a little bit and see what happens here. But once you mix this in, and when your cake is cool and you've got this all mixed, you want to go ahead and put it onto your cake. So see what I've got here? It's like a gummy coconut mixture. So there's not a whole lot of liquid there. So if you don't use quite 3 cups, you could probably spare to come down just a little bit on how much coconut is in there. As you can see, all I have left are just a few, crumbs here or there. But I will say, I mean, we snacked a little bit on this, so you could probably do 2 3/4 cups, something like that, so that it's not so much coconut that the caramel's not covering everything. It's one thing you want to make sure you do when you're mixing everything together. Make sure you get all that coconut in there. Okay, all right, it's all folded in. So now what the directions say is to put dollops of the topping all over the shortbread. So we'll do that. Put a couple dollops here and there. And then what you're gonna do is use the spatula to spread it out. All right, I'm gonna take this off of my wire rack so it'll be easier for me to put the caramel down. So you're basically going to spread this out over your entire shortbread. Hold that together. And you want to make sure that you get it all the way to the edges, all the way across. I imagine this is going to be just as difficult as spreading out the shortbread, because as this caramel gets cooler, it makes it harder to move around. But you don't want it to be real thick, because think about Samoas. It's a very small, thin layer across the top. So let's get this. I can probably move some of this over here a little bit. And one thing I'm noticing is you can push down on it and it'll move pretty well for you. It's kind of like the consistency if you've ever made Rice Krispie treats. Kind of reminds me of that. So you can still kind of move it around a little bit before it completely sets. Because what you're going to do is once this gets put in its complete layer, we're going to let it dry so that it kind of hardens. And when I say dry, I mean cool off. Here comes that perfectionist again. Alright, y'all. I think that's about as good as I'm going to get it this first time around. One thing I've learned over the years of making stuff is each time you do it, it gets better. So this doesn't look pretty bad for a first time. Okay, so now for the next step, that's to melt the chocolate. Now, I use my double boiler for the caramel. So I'm going to use just a plain, simple metal bowl. And I've already got my water heated from before. So what we're going to do is just take the bowl, put it on top of the pot, and we'll let that get hot. You're going to take your 10 ounces of chocolate chips. You can either do the semi-sweet or milk chocolate, or you can do the dark chocolate. Now, dark chocolate is what the traditional recipe is. So if you're wanting this to be really close to what the Samoas taste like, then dark chocolate would be the better way to go. I'm going to do the milk chocolate first, just because everybody likes milk chocolate. Some people don't like dark chocolate. So we'll go with that one first. Go ahead, and bowl's kind of hot. So I'm going to put that chocolate in there. Okay. And those will slowly start to melt. Now, what you're going to do with this is, as soon as this settles, we're going to take a pizza cutter or knife, whatever, and you're going to cut it into 30 bars. And then after they're in the 30 bars, we'll pick each bar up, dip it in the chocolate, and put it back on the parchment paper. And now what I did is, the parchment paper that I used for the coconut, it didn't have anything on it. So I just took it off because all the coconut comes completely off of the parchment paper. So I just reused that piece, flipped it over, and so now I can use the back side of it so that we're not wasting parchment paper. And once we cut the pieces of the bars, we'll dip them in the chocolate and then put them onto this parchment paper, okay? All right, that chocolate melts pretty fast in that bowl. Now, one thing I'll tell you, if you're using a bowl instead of a double boiler that has a handle, make sure you have a pot holder. I'm notorious for burning myself. So just make sure that you have something that you can steady that bowl with so that it doesn't move and make a big, huge mess. Now, I have gas burners, so obviously the heat's a little bit more intense because that flame's actually coming up the side of the pan. If you have a traditional, electric burner, it's gonna be a little bit different. Turn the heat down just a bit. Move my pan off to the side so I'm not toasting my hand. Okay, so you can see that chocolate's starting to melt. And all it is it's the heat coming up from the pot from where the water is boiling up underneath it. Hence the name double boiler. Okay. Now once we get this done, what the recipe says is to take the cookies and you're going to dip them in there, and then whatever is left over we're going to drizzle across the top. And that's kind of to imitate what the Samoas look like. When you get those, you know, they have that little line of chocolate drizzle across the top. So according to the recipe, we should have some left over to be able to do that. Okay, so the chocolate's just about melted. I'm gonna leave the burner on low so that it will continue to keep heating up that chocolate. And while that's doing that, we're gonna come over here to the actual, I guess, cookie or cake or Samoa square. And it says to cut it into 30 bars. I don't know that I'm gonna get 30 out of this because I'm just not really good at math. I'm probably gonna cut this into probably like 24. So the first thing I'm gonna do is get this about halfway. Yeah, about halfway. And pizza cutter works really good. It cuts straight through that topping. So it's a good thing that I don't drive like I cut, because I'd have an accident every day. Okay. Now, one thing I will note, this cake is kind of brittle. They do want it to be crispy on the edges, so we did what it said to do. But it definitely separates pretty easily, even without our little boo-boo. Okay, so 4, so 1. Now, as you can see, as I'm cutting this cookie kind of pulls away. So I don't know that rolling it through is a good idea. Because it seems like, at least, you know, we cooked it on the low side of what they said to cook it on. It said 20 to 25 minutes. We were right at the 20 mark when we had the edges brown like they said in the directions. So, you know, I guess as it cools, it hardens. And when you're starting to cut, it does make it a little rough. So you can see it's important to get all the way to the edges on those pans, on the pan, because we have some pieces that are bigger and some pieces are a little bit smaller, but of course some of that could just be the way that I cut. Okay, so the chocolate's just about melted. Stir it up a couple more times. One thing I'm noticing is that with the milk chocolate, I don't know yet about the dark chocolate, but it's very thick and it doesn't want to completely melt. Now maybe if you did this in a microwave, maybe it would, but the directions say that you have to keep heating it up just to make sure that you don't scorch it. So I don't know that I would necessarily take the chance that you're gonna scorch the chocolate. I think just, if you just keep, smearing the chocolate down into the heat of the bowl, it'll, it'll smooth out. So now what we're gonna do is you're gonna take one of your bars, okay? You're gonna dip it down into the chocolate. Make sure not to burn yourself. Holy cow, that's really hot. Okay, and continue to do that with all of your bars. Okay, so just want to barely get the bottom of the bar, and then put it onto your parchment paper for it to dry. You know, I almost think, guys, the easier way to do this might actually be, aha, how about you just paint the bottom of them? I think I like that better. Okay, so I mean, you have your spatula, why not, right? There's my little ubu. So we'll use the chocolate to hide that. And of course, when it dries, you won't be able to tell anyway. Yeah, I'll tell y'all, just from doing it the first time and burning my finger, it was not very practical to dip it down in there. This is much easier. Okay, so now that we have that done, we'll go ahead and let those cool. And then we'll put the remaining part of the chocolate into a Ziploc bag and we'll kind of drizzle the top and make it look all pretty. Okay, so I've taken the chocolate and put it into a Ziploc bag. Now, this is really hot. I want y'all to know, just like how with kitchen wax or with wax, like candle wax, once it gets stuck on you, you know, it won't roll off your hand, it sticks. And so a couple of these, when I was painting them on, you can scald your fingers, so be very, very careful. So I went ahead and put the rest of the chocolate into a Ziploc bag. It's still pretty hot to the touch, so I'm gonna use an oven glove. But all you're gonna do is cut the tip, almost like a piping bag for icing, and we'll just drizzle the chocolate over the top. Now, obviously, I made this pretty big, so we're just gonna kind of and actually, that oven bag, the oven mitt, I don't really need all that. And the faster you move this, you'll get some of that, the look like you get with the cookies. Now, once I get down here a little bit further, it does get a little bit hotter at the bottom. I'll put this on. Be very careful with that. You don't want to scald your hand. Next time I would cut the tip just a little bit thinner, but who doesn't like chocolate on their cookie, so. All right, a little bit extra. Let's see, where else can we have? All right, and then the only thing left to do on these is let them sit and let the chocolate dry on them, and then it'll be time to eat them. Okay guys, so now comes the moment of truth. But before I taste it, a few things. One, definitely use a smaller hole when you're cutting the bag, because my little drizzles came out awfully big. This is definitely like the pictures on Pinterest where it's like Pinterest fail. As far as the presentation goes, I can definitely work on that. The other thing to keep in mind is definitely make sure that your crust goes all the way to the edge. Just from looking at them, it looks like the cookie's a little thick, but we'll taste that in a minute, and maybe that's not a big deal, but maybe make your pan a little bit bigger and press it out a little bit thinner. Another thing is be very careful with that milk chocolate, because it will burn your fingers if you're not careful. Let's see, what else? I don't know. Definitely, when I was talking about reversing the order, definitely make your cake first. Let it sit off to the side and get cool. And then I guess now it's time to taste it and see what it's gonna be like. So let's take one of these. You'll see the chocolate has dried on the bottom, and the icing or the milk chocolate has dried on the top. This is definitely one of those pieces that I didn't get the coconut all the way to the end, but I'm still excited to try it. So let's see. See what it tastes like. Very good. We'll be making these again. Now, the chocolate, I can tell the difference in the chocolate. You can taste the milk chocolate versus the dark chocolate. So I'll be interested to see what happens when we do this with dark chocolate. But given everything that I've learned just from making it this one time, I'm sure next time will be just as good, if not better. Thank you for coming by and cooking with me and learning with me as we go along. If you liked this video, go ahead and give it the old thumbs up. Share it with other people. If this is your first time here, go ahead and subscribe. And like always, have a nice day. Hey y'all, welcome back. Normally we've already said goodbye and the credits are rolling and everything's good to go, but I had a chance to eat the Samoa Bars the next morning after we made the video last night. And I just had to stop and tell you guys, these bars are 10 times better. They're delicious right after they're done, but they are so much better the next morning. If you put them in the refrigerator and let them chill and let the chocolate completely set, they pull completely off of the parchment paper and they are absolutely delicious. See, the chocolate completely sets on the bottom, and even though that's not exactly the most appealing, they are really, really delicious. So just wanted to let y'all know this recipe is great, but make sure to let them sit overnight or sit in the refrigerator for a while to completely let them set, because the taste is much better when it's done that way. Thank you guys, and y'all have a nice day.